Who wrote the books of the law? I'm Bill Snodgrass, and in this episode of About the Bible, that's what we're going to talk about. Who wrote the books of the law? Well, what are the books of the law to start with? Those are the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Some people call it the Pentateuch, Penna being 5. The tradition is the books of Moses, the 5 books that Moses wrote. Tradition for centuries and centuries and centuries held that Moses was the author, that Moses wrote those books. But late 20th century scholarship began to look at things and began to ask questions about everything, one of which is, could Moses have written those books? They called upon arguments such as vocabulary and syntax of the Hebrew language as an argument to say, it looks like more than one person was writing. It looks like multiple people wrote these books. And the fact that perhaps Moses didn't write them suddenly becomes a barrier of faith for a lot of people. So we're going to kind of address that, and I'll come to a conclusion at the end. So let's get started. First of all, we know that Moses wrote something. The Exodus account itself says that Moses sat down and wrote the law of the Lord. The Moses sat down and wrote. It doesn't say he sat down and he told everyone to memorize and pass it on. We've talked about the strength of the oral tradition, and that's how Moses would have received things that happened before he was born. The oral tradition would have passed those things on to him, but we know for sure that he sat down and wrote something. 2 Kings, the book of the law was found in the temple, and this caused great excitement for the king at that time. So we know there was something written in Exodus, and we know that there was something found in 2 Kings. So we know there were at that time things that were the book of the law. In another video, we'll talk about the scribal tradition, and it's the confidence that we can have in the scribal tradition. So even if the book that was found in Kings was a copy of the book that Moses wrote, whatever it was that they found caused great joy and excitement. So could Moses have been the one who held the pen? For the most part, I would say he could have been. The stories, the accounts, the things could have been passed to him. His encounter with God on the mountain would certainly have informed a lot of the writing. And so there becomes some arguments against that we need to take a look at. One argument is Moses died at the end of Exodus. And how about those last couple of chapters of Exodus? Who wrote those? Did he write those prophetically about what happened after he died, or did someone else pick up the pen to finish? It's an interesting question, and either of the answers are satisfactory to me. Someone else, Joshua or Miriam or someone else, could have picked up the pen and finished writing, and so I'm okay with that. Or Moses could have prophetically written those last chapters and verses, and that would be okay with me too. So the fact that Moses died in the end of Exodus is not a stumbling block for me. One big scholarly argument against Moses being the single author is that the language and the syntax changes. Even from Genesis 1 to Genesis 2, the language and the syntax of the writing changes. I have two reasons that this doesn't bother me. One is that if Moses was writing down things that were passed to him by means of oral tradition, he would have written them down exactly as the oral tradition said they were to be said. So, he huffed and he puffed and he blew the house down. Little pig, let me come in. He would not have deviated from the words of the oral tradition. He would have written them down exactly as they were passed on. That's how accurate and how much strength was in the oral tradition. The second is, one writer can write in multiple voices and use different vocabulary. I write a lot of things for students. I write fiction. The voice I use writing to 9th graders is different than the voices I used when I was writing scholarly papers for my seminary professors. So the fact that the books are written with different voices, different syntax, and even different vocabulary, I do the same thing depending on who I'm writing to. And so I'm okay with Moses wrote it all, but he wrote with different voices. Doesn't bother me one bit. So where does this bring us? It brings us to the fact that Moses, in my opinion, could have written them all. Moses certainly wrote something, yet It's okay with me if we are to say that what became the Pentateuch was the result of several people in the time between Moses and 2 Kings, several people compiled. I'm okay with that too. That does not challenge my faith. And why is that? Why? Because what we see in the New Testament is we see that Jesus relied on the Pentateuch as authoritative. Jesus even quotes the Pentateuch in the great what are the two greatest commandments? Both are quotations out of the books, the 5 books of the Pentateuch. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all soul and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. These are both quotes Jesus was citing from the book of the law. So that Jesus considered these authoritative is good enough for me. It's good enough for me if Jesus considered them authoritative. Who am I to dispute that? I'm okay with it being Moses, and Moses held the pen, and the Spirit of God inspired Moses to write everything. I'm also okay if, following Moses, they took whatever it was that he wrote down in Exodus and they fleshed it out with oral tradition and passed that on, and that's what ended up in 2 Kings. I'm okay with that scenario as well. Why am I okay with either or? I'm okay with it because, like I just said, Jesus considered them authoritative, and if Jesus considered the law, the Torah, authoritative, I should also. If your faith is built on it must have been Moses, then you probably, let me be a little judgmental here, need to re-examine your faith. Your faith needs to not be built on who held the pen or who held the quill or who held the chisel and stone. Unless the Bible explicitly says who wrote it, the Bible didn't really want us necessarily to know. The Pentateuch does not identify who the author is, and it's left for us to work that out. And as a result of that, we have a lot of arguments and disagreements. Don't let authorship of the Pentateuch be a stumbling block for your faith. That's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Please sign up for notifications, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, leave me a comment or a question. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.